Welcome back to How to Build a Story Part 2, Motive, hosted by Rachel and Rachael. So, here we are again. If you haven't seen Part 1, there will be a link just down below, but it shouldn't matter too much if you watch these out of order as well. So, motive, the thing that I fucked up so badly in North of the End that I had to throw out 30,000 words and months of work just down the drain. If I had started by doing the stuff that I'm going to tell you about in this video, North of the End might have already been finished by now. But I didn't, because I didn't know that, because I was young and stupid. You learn from your mistakes. Here you are, learn from my mistakes. Before your pen hits paper to start drafting, you probably want to know your character's motives. So, super fast outline for this video. What is motive? Why is it important? How do you brainstorm it? How do you pick one from your brainstorming? How do you create the stakes and add depth? And how many motives do you need per character, per story? And then we're going to shut this thing down, because otherwise the government will. Motive is, in some sense, the reason you're writing the story. It's the essence of a character. A character can be physically detailed up the wazoo, but unless you've got a really solid motive in there, all you've got is a really pretty empty shell. A character can have no physical description at all. They could be non-corporeal, and as long as they still have a solid motive, your reader will still care about them and they will be able to carry the story. In the equation of story structure, you add motive to conflict and you get consequence. Character wants a thing. Something gets in the way of the thing. Eventually, character either fails or succeeds in getting the thing. Without motive, nothing in your story can matter. Same way that if you don't have a sense of taste, it can't matter if you're eating chocolate or soil. Perspective creates meaning, to get philosophical about it. Without a sense of hearing, there's no difference between Sonic Youth and Paramore, or Chelsea Wolfe and Robin Thicke. If there's no motive, nothing that can happen in your story can ever be conflict. Literally anything could happen, and all of it is going to be irrelevant to your story. This is the mistake I made in my first draft of North of the End. I started writing a story that didn't have a main character yet, didn't have a motive, and everything was just meaningless. It was just a mess. Motive is the seed from which your other story elements grow. Deciding a motive is, in some senses, deciding what story you're going to tell. Motive is going to play a huge part in the themes of your story. You can't write a story about the struggle to maintain integrity and morality in a hostile environment without a character that wants to maintain integrity and morality in a hostile environment. So motive consists of two parts, the desire and the stakes. At its most basic, the desire is the thing they want and the stakes are why they want it. I like to write mine out just in two short paragraphs, one for the motive and one for the stakes. Main characters will have longer, more detailed paragraphs. Minor characters might be as short as just a sentence for each. But you're gonna want paragraphs instead of single words to really get specific about your motives, and I'll explain more about that in a wee bit. I'm gonna use some tiny 3-sentence stories to illustrate this. Here's a story with no motive. Julie exists. She's probably got brown hair or something. Julie's car breaks down and fixing it uses up all of her savings. That's what's meant to be the conflict. And the consequence, or the effect, or the twist, or whatever you want to call it, is Julie sells her car to get the money back and uses that to open a coffee shop. This doesn't even really feel like a story, does it? It just kind of reads as like random events, you know, like why should I care about Julie? Why should I care about what's happening? Who cares, essentially? Here's a version of that where we have a motive. Julie is planning to open her own coffee shop. That's her desire, because she's sick of working for bosses who don't respect her. Those are the stakes. Now, Julie's car breaks down and fixing it uses up all of her savings. So, Julie sells her car to get the money back and opens up her coffee shop. See how having the motive there gives the twist meaning. Selling her car becomes a sacrifice that Julie has chosen to make, motivated by her dream of opening a coffee shop. Suddenly it makes sense. Suddenly it's a story. But your motive, conflict and effect have to match. So here's an example of an Avengers themed 3-sentence story where the motive doesn't match the rest of it. Black Widow's motive is that she wants to redeem herself for her past crimes. In her arrogance, she starts a war with the Frost Giants and is exiled by Odin. Black Widow learns what it really means to be a king and Odin welcomes her back. Now obviously I'm mixing the motive from Black Widow's story with the conflict and effects of Thor's story, and you see how it's a non sequitur, it doesn't make any sense. You're like, that didn't redeem her for her past crimes, this is irrelevant. Contrast that with Black Widow's story with the right conflict and effect. Black Widow wants to redeem herself for her past crimes. Black Widow joins the Avengers to fight the kind of people she used to work for. Black Widow gains the respect of other heroes and helps save the world. This is the right resolution for her motive, and so it makes you feel something, even in a 3-sentence story. It feels complete. So how do you find a motive for your character? Well, you brainstorm. You use all that shit from the last video that I was talking about. And to do that, you use motive questions. So the ones that I use most often are, what does this character want more than anything? And what is this character's greatest fear or hate? But again, wording is important, I think. My brain doesn't really do much for Holly Lyle's term compelling need, but for some reason it will jump through hoops if I use the word motive instead. So use whatever questions gets you results. If you would rather phrase it, what does this character want to achieve? What is this character trying to avoid or escape from? Change it up. Use a thesaurus if you have to. As you can probably tell from these sets of questions, you can express motives in a positive and a negative way. You can express it as a fear or hate, or as a desire or want. It is two sides of the same coin. For example, Julie wants to open a coffee shop is the positive expression of that motive. Julie's afraid of never being able to open a coffee shop would be the negative one. And yes, this is just two different ways of saying the same thing. But your brain might or probably will give you different things based on which question you ask while you're brainstorming. I recommend trying both. I was initially really resistant to using the what does this character fear or hate questions, but when I finally did, I found it really opened things up and got things flowing where they hadn't been before. Expressing it in the both ways in your write-up of your motives can sometimes be helpful when you're trying to generate conflict from it as well, so you don't have to, but I think it's good practice. And you want to be as specific as possible here. Yes, almost any character, you will be able to boil it down to a single idealistic word like their motive is love or friendship or success, but that's not going to help you write your story. Do they want love? Or do they want a loving relationship with a specific character that lives up to societal ideals of romance? Or to contrast, maybe they want a loving relationship which is honest and genuine above all, based on individual needs and desires, societal norms be damned. Success could be more specifically realised as Julie wants to build a successful and rewarding business by opening up her own coffee shop. A place where she can really build a community and take pride in the quality of her food and coffee and work. So you've used a motive question and a specific brainstorming method to brainstorm a bunch of ideas for a character's motive. So how do you pick the right one? Motives have to fulfill different roles depending on what kind of character they're for. A protagonist motive really needs to encapsulate the main theme or themes of the story. For an antagonist, their motive must inherently conflict with the protagonist's motive, which is why it's actually a lot easier to build antagonists from your protagonist. Take your protagonist's motive and be like, what kind of person would want the opposite of this or want to thwart this? For allies, minor characters, people who are sort of on the borderline, you want their motive to share some commonality with the protagonists, but not be identical to it. For instance, Julie might have a friend who's opening this business with her, and they have that shared common goal of wanting to have a successful coffee shop. They might have very different ideas on how to go about that. They might have very different ideas on what a good coffee shop consists in. That's going to generate conflict, even in characters that you're meant to like or root for. And it's entirely possible to pick a motive for your main character and then later realise, wait, that's actually not the right one. Because if you pick the wrong motive, when you start to generate conflict from it, you're going to get something that veers quite far from the story that you pictured telling. I actually did this myself with North of the End. I had survival down as one of Parker's main motives, but when I started to generate conflict for it, it was all very small and inconsequential, and like, oh, she lost her water bottle, and oh, that fire she started is doing something bad. When I realised that it was actually finding an end to the Tyrion pandemic specifically, started generating really massive, relevant conflict. I realised that the desire to survive actually served as the stakes for the Tyrion motive. But you know, if motive is this massive, important, story-affecting thing, and you're meant to ask questions like, what is the most important thing to this person, this character? You can get stumped really quickly. It can take a while before you really get a handle on a character's motive and really find something that you really care about writing and that you're really excited to write. And that's where texture comes in. Appearance and texture and details aren't the core of a character, but they can sometimes be a good way to find that core. Your brain kind of believes that characters are real people, and that's how you get to know real people. You don't immediately grasp the core of their being and what drives them. You start out by meeting them and getting a first impression and seeing this is what they look like, this is how they act, this is maybe their fashion sense or their aesthetic. And then you get to know them and it slowly becomes clear what kind of person they are at heart. Sometimes building a character can be like that. Sometimes you have to start messing around with details and image stuff and stuff that doesn't really matter in the broader context of the story to find your way in to that motive and find your way into the really important stuff. That's totally a valid way to work. For example, in North of the End, I kind of used this method to find a motive for Kieran Hargrove. The first little detail I realised was that he was a philosopher. That detail led me to the idea that he had this strong sort of philosophical role model in his dad, and that eventually led me to his motive, which is to survive the Tyrion pandemic with integrity. His dad could have been the leader that they really needed, but he died and Kieran survived. Kieran's a natural pessimist, but he is going to try and maintain some of his dad's optimism and hope and faith in civilization and humanity to find a way for him and the other survivors to live that would make his dad proud. To sum up, Kieran's motive would be to survive Tyrion with integrity and build a community of survivors that his dad could be proud of, and the stakes would be letting down the memory of his dad, which he cannot bear to do. So how do you create stakes then? So your character has a desire. It might be something as simple as a cup of coffee, but that's not super interesting on its own, so you need to establish some stakes. And you do that by using one tiny but immensely powerful word. Why? What specific combination of personality and life experience and events has made this character want this thing? Example, Julie wants coffee. Maybe she's actually addicted to caffeine and withdrawal's gonna seriously fuck up her day. Maybe her long-lost mother was a coffee bean. Maybe it's because coffee is symbolic of the kind of successful, motivated, passionate person that she wants to be. To raise the stakes and add more depth, you need to ask questions like, how could this matter more to this person? Let yourself come up with dumb things. Physical details give your characters texture. Questions like this are how you give your characters depth. And you can also use this method to derive motive from conflict. Say you're revising a story rather than starting a new one. You know X thing is going to happen, but not really why it matters. So you do the same thing. Ask, why would this be important to this character? Start building details into their life and backstory that would make them care about this. For example, in North of the End, I have a character called Irvin, who I know is meant to be an antagonist for Parker, the main character. He doesn't have a motive, he's just a shell at the moment. But I already know a lot of Parker's story and the things that happened to her and her conflicts. So I take Parker's motive and conflicts and reverse engineer motives for Irvin that conflict with that. Now Parker has a handful of motives, so I brainstormed for all of them, but I ended up sticking on Parker's motive of wanting to sort of overcome and understand and come to terms with her depression. So, Irvin hates Parker, wants her gone. Why? And I thought, what if Irvin had a wife and she committed suicide and he only found out after she died that she had been dealing with depression for maybe years of their relationship. Irvin is very much into traditional gender roles and doesn't really understand or believe in mental illness. And so his wife's death comes out of nowhere for him, breaks his heart. And so here comes Parker, this young woman who's very questioning of his lifestyle and is trying to make sense of her own depression and sometimes even using humour to cope with it. And to Irvin, it's like she is cheapening the thing that killed his wife. Of course he hates Parker. She represents his loss and his complete inability, even now, to understand that loss. So how many motives do you need in a story? How long is a piece of string, really? Characters, especially main characters, can definitely have multiple motives for the plot and subplots. You just need to remember that every new motive that you bring in is going to have its own conflict and its own resolution. It's its own little story thread. I personally tend towards thick weaves of lots of motives and threads for a handful of characters rather than a couple which are a lot more focused. Basically, it's always going to be a trade-off between breadth and having multifaceted characters, and depth and having really focused, deep characters. If anything, I think for North of the End, I'm probably going to have too many motives. I've got about 5 for Parker and at least 2 for everyone else, but I'm prepared to cut some of those out completely while I'm working my way through the second draft, if it seems like I'm just going to have too much and it's just going to make this into a massive, massive book. It's also important to note that you can deal with a character's motive and conflict and resolution in a really brief manner, really in a couple of sentences. There's nothing saying that for every motive and conflict that you work out that you have to express that and describe it in full scenes or chapters. So here we are. In conclusion, motives are complicated and can be hard to get right, but are really important. And they're the first step in really writing a story that resonates with you and hopefully your readers too. The next video in the series is going to be how to generate conflict from the motive work you've just done. I'm Rachael Stephen. I am an author and a YouTuber. You can find me and my writing at rachelstephen.com. Over there you can read some free chapters of my book State of Flux, which is available on Amazon and elsewhere at the moment, and find out a bit more about North of the End if you want to as well. If you haven't subscribed already, maybe do that, because your long lost mother was a subscriber, and tomorrow you'll find a letter from her in the attic saying that you come from a long line of heroes, and you can be the hero she always knew you could be too, if you just subscribe. Goodbye! How many times can I be interrupted? I'm gonna end you. Powerful story somethings. E-back and a paper book. Corporeal. Look, it's a small annoying dog. Oh. Why is it important? Something else, which I can't remember. You just sneeze. Just sneeze through my shit. I'm trying to talk really fast here, okay? No, Elfie. No, you can't. She slept all through the rehearsal. Why is life so hard? I have a lot of things to say about motive. I didn't realise until I started scripting, and I thought I was done and I was like, oh, this is 5 pages and 1,500 words long. And then I was like, oh, I forgot these basic things as well, which are kind of the crux of the video. So better add them in. So now it's like 2,000 words of script. I hope you all appreciate this. And then she's gonna scratch to get back in, and I'm gonna have to stop again, and this is gonna take the rest of my life. That I had to throw out. That's noisy and annoying, thank you. So I'm having this tea with cream instead of milk because there's no more milk left and I'm gross. Yeah, look, she hates me. Aww. Little doodle. I'm sorry. I know it's degrading.